If you're talking about it, I'll be talking about it. Dennis Prager here. Join me this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning, Kristen McCreary of the Chicago Tribune Ed Board. And Kristen, this is shaping up to be quite an interesting state and local election cycle with the new front on the war against cultures of sexual harassment and assault being state houses, including ours in Springfield. Miami Herald piece over the weekend. Allegations of sexual assault, sexual harassment, and infidelity among the state's legislators flew like shrapnel from a bomb blast in recent weeks. And talking just about the internal politics there related to bad behavior, perhaps in some instances, maybe even criminal behavior when you talk about sexual assault. And, of course, we had a woman come forward last week, Denise Rothheimer, and accuse incumbent State Senator Ira Silverstein of sexual harassment. We've had other anonymous claims of sexual harassment. And we find out that actually there were more than 24 complaints against members of the General Assembly, maybe not all that were sexual harassment related, because we don't know, because there was no legislative inspector general for years. So those complaints just sat there unacted upon. And this was a failure of the leadership of both parties in the House and Senate, starting with the Speaker, Mike Madigan, to fill this vacancy, which all of a sudden got filled over the weekend.
Right.
Evanston lawyer Julie Porter named to the long-standing vacancy to oversee state legislator ethics, as if that's not an oxymoron.
Right. So they had someone who was supposed to, like an aide, who was collecting all of the complaints and making pretty decent coin for a obviously very part-time position, because there was no inspector general, so it was just kind of an assistant, and not even bothering to explore or look into them. So how heroic are our legislative leaders now that this has become a hot news story and they all look terrible? Now they're rushing to fill this position, setting up task forces, passing new laws, having their members sign statements, reminder policies. It's a little late.
Yeah.
A little late for that.
To me, this smacks of non-aggression pact between the two parties. You've got bad actors in your caucus. I've got bad actors in mine. Let's just take the kind of mutually assured destruction pact. You don't rat on me, and I won't rat on you, and we won't appoint a legislative inspector general to investigate any of this stuff. We'll just enable it in our caucus by sweeping it under the rug, and just get on about our business, because of course character and personal conduct doesn't matter when it comes to public policy making, at least so I've been told by so many.
Well, Ira Silverstein was in Democratic leadership in the Senate, and they were made aware of some of her complaints quite a while ago and didn't remove him from leadership until, of course, it became an embarrassing headline. And then I think Senator Terry Link also had a role in this, just where he knew that these complaints were piling up, but he took no responsibility to open them, to read them, to explore them by filling this inspector general post. So they did know these complaints were piling up. They just didn't bother to explore.
And I got to tell you, I think now, with a March election 100 days away, and then obviously November 2018 election, but because they game the system to try and cover themselves, you got to give Julie Porter time to do her job and review all these complaints and so forth. I want the complaints released with the accuser's names redacted, unless the accuser wants to come public. The accuser's names redact, but okay. They did this to themselves. This is not violative of their due process rights, for those who would jump to that defense. It's not violative. Those complaints should be made public right now, because we say, well, we'll give her time in this process. No. Because you've got a March primary where you have an opportunity perhaps to hold some of these people accountable.
That's true, as long as the victims are protected, because many of them they don't want their stories released in a way that would identify them. So if you can protect them and not identify them and redact enough that we still know the bad behavior and the bad actors, that would make sense.
Yeah. That's what I want to see.
Is Ira Silverstein up? Is his seat up? I'm looking it up right now to see.
I don't remember. I mean, it's not competitive unless somebody wants to get it late and into a primary late, because of course in that area, Skokie, Lincolnwood, the near north. I mean,
I'm sure there are better done. I mean, I would welcome a primary for someone
Well,
who's
yeah.
accused of this.
Well, I know, but I mean, you don't want to. I mean, the important thing is that we protect the status quo. See, that's the whole thing. That's like the sexual harassment sensitivity training or whatever it is they're trying to move.
Right.
The idea is change on the outside to protect continuity on the inside. Do you understand how this works? I mean, I know you do. I'm speaking rhetorically. That's how this works in Illinois. Change on the outside to buffalo enough of the general population, one more cycle, to protect continuity on the inside. And, I mean, why wouldn't they?
He is up, by the way.
Why wouldn't they? We keep falling for it. So, Ira Silverstein, well, welcome a primary challenger. I doubt he'll get one. Maybe his wife.
She could. She's a Chicago alderman, right?
Maybe his wife will primary. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be.
Kramer versus Kramer. And then also this week on the policy front with respect to economic policy, there was this effort that you wrote about last week in the veto session that failed, barely, to prohibit these local right-to-work zones that were passed in communities like Lincolnshire up in Lake County, and also to imprison local officials who would vote for such an ordinance.
I'm just shaking my head. I mean, this is just so many bridges too far. I understand the opposition to right to work. I still think even what we have talked about in the state are locally approved zones that local officials should have the right to institute as an economic development tool, a right to work zone. We heard from Toyota and from, I believe Cranes reported pretty substantially that part of the reason we didn't get the Toyota plant was because we're not a right to work state. But lawmakers are just going to keep ignoring the truth and the data and try to pass a bill that not only prohibits right to work zones, but would make it a criminal penalty in order to do so. That's an insanity.
That failed, and there's a possibility that Marty Moylan, who's the Madigan roll call vote representing Des Plaines, Park Ridge, Elk Grove Village, who sponsored that legislation, will rerun it, sans the criminal penalties, and pass it to prohibit without the criminal penalties, because basically the only reason he didn't pass it last week over Ronner's veto is you just had too many Democrats that were absent.
That's true. I mean, I think he just needs one vote, right? And there were concerns raised about the criminal penalty portion. So if he brings it up again this week, they're in veto session Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that we would have a ban on right to work in Illinois.
And you're going to have some Republicans vote for it. Some Republicans voted for the one with criminal penalties. You know why? Because they're in open revolt against the governor, and it's every man and woman
Still
for
a bad
themselves.
Vote. Terrible vote.
It is a bad vote.
I know, yeah.
But for more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined now by Mailee Smith, who is staff attorney and labor expert for the Illinois Policy Institute, with which I am affiliated. Mailee, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, thanks for having me this morning.
So is our read on what is likely to happen in Springfield this week with a rerun of the right-to-work zone prohibition on the mark?
That's exactly what we're expecting to happen. And that's correct. It missed the veto override by only one vote, and there were Democrats that were not there that day. So we do expect it to be run again. Now, one thing that I would add is that the House sponsor, Representative Moylan, has filed an amendment in a trailer bill that would take away that criminal penalty. The problem with that is that that's a separate bill. There's no guarantee that it would be passed. So SB 1905, the right to work prohibition, could pass this week with that criminal penalty. The trailer bill may not pass. And what we would have is a local right to work prohibition that is going to jail local leaders if they disagree with economic policy.
I mean, I just find that to be really remarkable. Has this been implemented anywhere in the country that you know of?
I am not aware that this has been implemented anywhere, this type of criminal penalty. In fact, I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of bills in my legal career, probably thousands, and I've never seen a criminal penalty just because the lawmakers disagree with an economic policy or a social policy. This is definitely a unique provision, an egregious provision, and it's definitely, undemocratic.
I think it's modeled after the policy in Havana. So we've decided with our new partner in peace there, our trading partner, the
Sure.
Castro regime, we decided to take some of their lead when
Yeah.
it comes to labor policy. On the right to work zones, Mailee, the basis for those, because one of the arguments against them is much like the arguments against different back in the day, different gun laws by local jurisdiction. Why not either do something uniform at the state level or do nothing at all? The patchwork of laws around the state
Right.
make the argument.
Well, here's the thing. There are 27 states with right-to-work laws, including nearly all of our neighbors. And we know that when businesses are seeking to relocate or expand, they look to see if a state is right to work. You referenced Rockford. We saw it firsthand last month. Rockford was rejected for the new Toyota Mazda plant. It was a 4,000-job facility. And one of the determining factors, as reported by Cranes, was that Illinois is not a right-to-work state. The remaining three contenders, they're right-to-work states. And so having no statewide right-to-work, we don't have a way to compete with these other locations. And what local right-to-work would do is give local leaders the ability to compete. And you know what? If it's a hodgepodge sort of map where some locations have it and some don't, I guess what that means is that there are going to be some hodgepodge locations of economic prosperity in Illinois, and then maybe the rest of the state will follow.
I mean, it's no different than, we have TIF districts. We have all different, when you describe a hodgepodge, why it boggles my mind why we keep talking about crime in the city of Chicago, lack of economic development, lack of opportunity. If you have areas on the south and west sides of the city of Chicago that haven't seen economic development, meaningful economic development in generations, and yet you still have members of the city council completely bought and paid for by organized labor who would never even consider helping their communities with a right to work zone that would be locally approved. I mean, it boggles my mind. And I'm also staring at Marty Moylan's campaign fund disclosure form at the moment. This is just one, ask me, the employee union in the state. Just this one labor union has contributed almost $25,000 to him over the years, including a $10,000 contribution last year. So
More on the way.
Well, of course, but I mean, you don't have to question who he is representing here.
That's right, and that is why the unions in Illinois are such a powerful source and a source to be reckoned with, because they are funding, it's a vicious circle where they are funding lawmakers owe them a favor, and we never see the economic ball pushed to a place where it's going to benefit the taxpayers in Illinois.
I think I tweeted this out too, and so I go to my Twitter, State House Chick, to find, because I believe there was an article recently that Indiana is growing union jobs faster than Illinois as a right-to-work state.
Yeah, true.
So
right.
all of this resistance is just, it doesn't make any sense.
And not just union jobs, they're growing manufacturing jobs. So during the recession, we lost more than 96,000 manufacturing jobs. We've lost more since then. But our neighboring states with right to work have been gaining jobs, and you referenced Indiana. Indiana has gained over 81,000 manufacturing jobs in that same time period that we lost so many.
She is Mailee Smith, staff attorney and labor expert for the Illinois Policy Institute. Mailee, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And she joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.